Now that I finally talked about Bulk and Skull, there's one more area that I always wanted to do with them. What was their best screw-ups, episodes, funny moments with food that they ever did? How well do they work within the story, but also how funny they were a part of the episode? Pizza mess. Now, this one, I think everyone always fixates on how bad Jeremy was dubbed. This was actually one of my favorite, because normally I didn't really care for when Bulk and Skull were the asses. It was more better when they split the difference. Can you imagine going into work every week and you have to have drinks thrown at you, fall down on the ground and potentially hurt yourself? A lot of work has to go into it. I think what was also fun about this scene is that, yes, Bulk and Skull are the punks, but it was also the few times that Jason could be a dick back to Bulk and Skull. And also a mixture of the mess that he went into, on top of falling into a pizza that was covered in dirt and grime and other stuff. Taking care of baby. This one was a pretty interesting one because this was fairly early in season 2, and we've gone through like every kind of bit of stages. Kind of funny, really funny, looking for the Power Rangers, and then all of a sudden they have to take care of this random baby. And it also opened up that other side of Bulk and Skull where it's just like, they can actually be pretty good characters in this way. And I wouldn't be surprised. This was kind of like the moment where the writers thought, maybe we should change the direction of Bulk and Skull. People did like them, taking care of the baby, even though they screwed up all over the place. Cave crash. If I had to give any moment of Bulk and Skull getting into a mess, was this one, because you really can't feel sorry for Bulk. He comes into the juice bar on a skateboard, being a dick as usual, like, I own this place, ha ha ha, who cares? Billy and Zach are trying to set something up, while Trini and Kim are trying to practice on the floor, and then he gets it in his face with a giant cake. Ernie was, baking that cake for this event, and then Bulkin wastes it. I can imagine all the times Bulk and Skull has done stupid things in the juice bar, and they had to pay Ernie back for all this nonsense. And I just wish they went a little bit more with it, because, I think one of the better things with Bulk and Skull was that Ernie interacts with them, because he kind of keeps them in check. And it would have been more interesting if Bulk and Skull had worked with Ernie rather than Lieutenant Stone. Crash on the plane. Now, for me, besides any of the major episodes like Doomsday, Green with Evil, the pilot, this is by far the best season 1 standalone episode they did. Not only was it a way to explain why isn't Kimberly in the Japanese footage for this particular episode, it involved Bulk and Skull, and it was something very unique, and they spent a lot of money on this episode because normally, they film only in the juice bar, the command center. They actually filmed all this plane stuff, the airport, the control tower, so there was a lot of effort into it. Even though Bulk and Skull were not heavily in the episode, you feel sorry for them, and Kim's trying to be the nice one, even though this was basically her day off to fly in with her uncle, and then Bulk and Skull have to go in there. There was only a couple of things that I didn't care for the plot. Now, why didn't they, teleport everyone out of the plane? I think it would have been interesting if they had thought about, okay, let's teleport Bulk and Skull out of the plane with the uncle so they can get help and they can be safe. Because at the end of the day, Bulk and Skull pass out, and they don't really do much for the remainder of the episode except for those funny bits, which they could have relegated to them being teleported onto the airport field and had those extra scenes while keeping Kim in the plane. Because after all, you could have easily had said, well, I don't want to leave the plane because, one, destroying property, you don't want Kim's uncle to pay for this plane, but two, also endangering the area. I mean, because you can bail and the plane can go and veer off and do everything. Yeah, you can go and direct it into the mountains, but it could still go haywire and go into a building, is all we know. So you could have still kept Kim trapped in there, mixed all the worlds together to make this very interesting episode. Amnesia, Goldar, Rito. I always said this was the downfall of Goldar, Rito, but at the same time, this was kind of an interesting way to keep Bulk and Skull active in the Zeo story. They went through a ton of stuff through season 1, 2, and 3. Punks, dicks to the Rangers, switching them over to being more funny idiots and finding out who the Power Rangers are, to season 3, evolving past punks and becoming police officers. So now what do you do with Bulk and Skull in the 4th season? Let's bring in Goldar and Rito, even though they should have just killed them off. I think that would have been a better ending. Not only that, though, I thought it was kind of a sweet revenge. Think about it. In the very first season of MMPR, Bulk and Skull were trapped in the bus and Goldar was going to kill them. Even though it destroyed Goldar and Rito, it would have been interesting to see what they could have done with that. Maybe they could have kind of converted Goldar into the good side with Rito. It could have been kind of interesting to see if they would have worked with the Rangers in this season. Make Goldar and Rito actually good people. It would have been kind of a cool way to incorporate Bulk and Skull into the story. Them redeeming themselves in the past 3 seasons. Redeem monsters at the same time. Body swaps. As for acting chops, the body swapping episode in Switching Places is the best one. Because there's a lot of things that you don't really notice. The way Bulk and Skull mimic their mannerisms perfectly. And for once, Bulk has to be Skull and Skull has to be Bulk, so you have to see Skull eating a whole bunch of endless food while Skull is in Bulk's body, and he does that weird thing that Skull always did in the background. I kind of wish this was a 2-parter episode to see more stuff done with Bulk and Skull and Kim and Billy. Food fight. Now, this was probably the most disgusting of all the episodes that Bulk and Skull had to be in, but it was one hell of an episode that involved like so many dumb things and so much mess that Bulk and Skull. And obviously, it was one of the few times that the monster was actually involved in this type of part of the story. Because it was kind of like, okay, how do we adapt this Jew Ranger episode? It's this weird, odd food, and they have this weird thing at the end. What can we do to explain it? Because it's kind of like this random bit. The MMPR episode kind of makes it work better. I think that was one of Jew Ranger's issues. They didn't have Bulk and Skull in Jew Ranger. It worked in their favor to mix everything together to make it more funny. Stuck in a can. Like the Foul Play in the Sky episode, let's make a follow-up episode, and I think this one was a far more better take, because like I said, there was many ways they could have gotten Bulk and Skull and the uncle out of the plane. In this case, they couldn't do anything. They were literally trapped in the cab of a monster. They're in danger, she's in danger, the other Rangers have to save their butt. I think that was another thing that made it more interesting, because one, Bulk and Skull are far more used in this episode, and not to mention, it was the one episode where it's just like the other Rangers were involved, and it was the few times they get to use the shark cycles. So it was a good single episode for Bulk and Skull. It was a nice, fun way to close off, Bulk and Skull with Kim. Bulk and Skull escape. But if I wanted to give like the best Bulk and Skull that involved the storyline, it had to go to King for a Day. Every scene that they were in was like over the top, but it wasn't where it was like, I don't buy any of it. It actually worked, which was surprising, because normally when Bulk and Skull are thrown into situations, but they actually had help with the alien in the cell with them. And even though it was so ridiculous of how they survived, what sucks the most is that it was the few times where they actually were telling the truth and no one bought it. Superhero dream. My favorite and dumbest moment out of all these episodes has got to be that ridiculous dream in Crystal of Nightmares. They went out of their way to build the Megazord cockpit. Before that point and even after, they never filmed any US footage of the cockpit, and it was fairly well done. It wasn't lit as great, because probably if they lit it any better, we would have seen all the flaws. Because this is like kind of the first time where we kind of like, I wish Bulk and Skull were Rangers, because it would have been hilarious to see what they would have done in an actual situation. And the one thing that I always wanted to know, what did they make their morphers out of? I know it was a burger and a hot dog, but what was the props? Were they custom? Did they build them from something, or like did they just stuff in some sort of random electronics into some sort of thing? Bulk and Skull are a unique case. They don't do that much, but at the same time they do a ton of stuff. It's kind of like why people misjudge the characters, because you only see them for these few minutes and they're filler. They're there to either initiate a problem, initiate part of the plot. Bulk and Skull are a pretty big, important part of the series as well. So I wanted to make this one episode showcasing them. I was trying really hard to say, what other episode was Bulk fun in Samurai? But because of the way the episodes were structured, I couldn't really think of any really fun moment in Samurai. Which it's the same thing, later seasons where, Turbo, they were turned into monkeys. I was like, I never found that funny. That was just stupid overall. LG is when they were just basically afterthoughts at that point. And in Space, even though they had those fun bits with Professor Phenonymous, nothing was really rememberable. I mean, there was that bee episode. The episode was more about the bee rather than Bulk Skull and Anonymous. What were your favorite Bulk and Skull episodes? Were you more of the fan of when Bulk and Skull were serious, or did you prefer when they were more funny? If you have a suggestion or topic you'd like me to cover, leave a comment down below and I may use it in next week's video.